Elisabeth of Austria, renowned for her beauty, lived a deeply troubled life. Married to Emperor Franz Joseph at the age of 16, she was thrust into the rigid and stifling environment of the Habsburg court, a world for which she was wholly unprepared. Despite her public image as a glamorous empress, Elisabeth struggled with depression, the suffocating constraints of court life, and a difficult relationship with her mother-in-law. She also endured profound personal losses, most notably the suicide of her only son. Consumed by grief and increasingly fixated on preserving her youthful appearance, Elisabeth withdrew from public life and spent much of her later years wandering across Europe in near-perpetual exile. Her tragic life came to an abrupt end when she was assassinated by an anarchist in Geneva, a fatal stab wound to the heart claiming the life of the Empress. Elisabeth was born in 1837 into the Bavarian royal family, the fourth of 10 children of Duke Maximilian Joseph of Bavaria and Princess Ludovica. Unlike many European aristocrats of his time, Duke Maximilian was eccentric and notably progressive in his ideals, traits that would profoundly shape Elisabeth's upbringing and worldview. Her childhood stood in stark contrast to the rigid, highly structured lives typical of royal families. Formal lessons were often replaced with long days spent riding freely through the Bavarian countryside alongside her siblings. This unrestrained environment fostered a deep love of nature, independence, and personal freedom. Affectionately called Sisi by her family and closest confidants, Elisabeth grew into a young woman who valued privacy and resisted rigid convention. Overall, she had a happy and privileged childhood. Throughout her childhood, Elisabeth shared an especially close bond with her older sister Helene. In 1853, the two sisters travelled with their mother to Austria, where hopes were pinned on an advantageous marriage for Helene. Ludovica's sister, Archduchess Sophie, the formidable mother of Franz Joseph I, had failed to secure a suitable match for her son. Among Europe's great royal houses and now turned inward to family. Privately, Ludovica also hoped the trip might secure a second marriage in the family. Between Franz Joseph's younger brother Karl Ludwig and Elisabeth, Helene's serious and deeply pious was the expected choice. Sophie assumed her son would comply and dutifully propose to his cousin, but the emperor had other plans. At just 23, Franz Joseph fell instantly and irrevocably in love with Elisabeth. He flatly refused to propose to Helene, declaring to his mother that he would marry Elisabeth, or not marry at all. Sophie was furious, yet faced with her son's resolve, she ultimately relented. Franz Joseph and Elisabeth were married on April 24, 1854. Their engagement, however, was marked by a striking imbalance. Franz Joseph radiated happiness and anticipation, while Elisabeth grew increasingly withdrawn, quiet, anxious, and often found in tears. The overwhelming formality of the Austrian court weighed heavily upon her, as did the looming presence of her aunt, now her mother-in-law. The Austrian court was unyieldingly rigid, governed by strict etiquette and tradition, an environment that suffocated the free-spirited, progressive-minded Sisi. Most painful of all was her relationship with Sophie, who refused to relinquish authority and regarded Elisabeth as a foolish, unfit girl, unworthy of the roles of empress or mother. When Elisabeth gave birth to her first child in 1855, a daughter named Sophie, Archduchess Sophie immediately took control. Elisabeth was forbidden from caring for her own child, and was not even allowed to name her. The pattern repeated itself with the birth of their second daughter, Archduchess Gisela, in 1856. Following Gisela's birth, the pressure increased even further on Elisabeth to produce a male heir. A cruel pamphlet was anonymously left in her private chambers that suggested the role of a queen, or empress, was only to bear sons, not to have political opinions, and that a consort who did not bear a male heir would be a scheming danger to the country. Though unsigned, it was widely believed that the message had come from Sophie herself. In 1857, Elisabeth suffered an even deeper blow. She travelled with the emperor and her young daughters to Hungary for the first time. There she felt an immediate and profound connection to the Hungarian people, their warmth, informality, and directness offering a stark contrast to the cold rigidity of the Austrian court. Yet Hungary would also become the site of unimaginable loss. Both of her daughters fell gravely ill. Only one would recover. The Archduchess Sophie died at just 2 years old. The loss shattered Elisabeth. In the aftermath of her daughter's death, she withdrew not only from court life, but from Gisela as well. Grief turned inward, manifesting as control over her body, her appearance, and her daily rituals. It was during this period that Elisabeth began the obsessive beauty and physical regimens that would become legendary. Prolonged fasting, punishing exercise, the painstaking care of her ankle-length hair, and tightly laced corsets that shaped her fragile frame. Yet even in isolation, Elisabeth was far from idle. During the long, silent hours required to maintain these routines, she turned her mind outward. She immersed herself in languages, literature, poetry, and philosophy, quiet acts of resistance that allowed her to reclaim a sense of self within a court that had stripped her of autonomy. In 1858, Elisabeth at last fulfilled the role that had been relentlessly demanded of her. She gave birth to a son, the long-awaited heir crown Prince Rudolf. His birth secured Elisabeth a firmer foothold at court, and for the first time she possessed leverage she could wield. She used it deliberately, most notably to speak on behalf of the people she had come to admire above all others, the Hungarians. During this period, Elisabeth formed a close alliance with Hungarian diplomat Gyula Andrassy. Their bond was built on shared ideals and mutual respect, though court gossip painted it as something far more scandalous. Rumours of a love affair followed them relentlessly, so much so that when Elisabeth gave birth to her fourth child in 1868, whispers spread that Andrassy, not her husband, was the child's true father. Around 1860, Elisabeth was once again pushed to the margins of power. Years of emotional strain and political pressure took a physical toll, manifesting in recurring bouts of illness. Compounding this were rumours of her husband's affair with an actress, an indignity Elisabeth used as justification to retreat from court life altogether. Notably, her symptoms often returned whenever she was forced back into the suffocating atmosphere of Vienna. It was during this period of withdrawal that Elisabeth began for the first time to openly resist both her husband and her domineering mother-in-law. When they pressed for another pregnancy, she refused. The marriage between Elisabeth and Emperor Franz Joseph I, already distant, grew colder still, more a political arrangement than a partnership. Yet in 1867, Elisabeth made a calculated return. Re-entering her marriage was not an act of surrender, but strategy. With her influence restored at a critical moment, she helped champion the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, which transformed the empire into a dual monarchy, granting Austria and Hungary equal standing. Franz Joseph and Elisabeth were crowned King and Queen of Hungary, and Andrassy was appointed Prime Minister. In 1868, Elisabeth gave birth to her youngest child, Valerie. Unlike her other children, Valerie was raised almost entirely under her mother's care, and became the focus of Elisabeth's long-suppressed maternal devotion, at times expressed with an intensity that bordered on excess. With her new status as Queen of Hungary, Elisabeth had more justification than ever to remain where her heart truly lay. She spent long stretches of time in Hungary, far from Vienna and its suffocating court. Even after the death of her lifelong rival, her mother-in-law Sophie, in 1872, Elisabeth did not return to court in any lasting way. Instead, she chose movement over permanence, travel over ceremony, and devoted herself to raising her youngest child, Valerie, largely in Hungary. She adored the Magyar people, and they adored her in return. Elisabeth gained a lasting reputation for her preference for sincerity over protocol, favouring common people over polished courtiers, warmth over rigid etiquette. In Hungary, she was not merely an empress, she was beloved. That fragile sense of belonging was shattered in 1889. Elisabeth's only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, died in a suicide pact with his mistress, Mary Wetzler, at Mayerling. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Europe and destroyed Elisabeth. Sensitive, intellectual, and emotionally complex like his mother, Rudolf had been forced into a harsh military upbringing entirely unsuited to his nature. With Rudolf's death, the line of succession passed to Franz Joseph's brother, Karl Ludwig, and after his death to his son, Franz Ferdinand. A shift that would later alter the course of history itself. For Elisabeth, however, history had become secondary to grief. Death seemed to surround her. Her father had died in 1888. Her beloved sister Elaine followed in 1890, as did her closest political ally and friend, Gyula Andrassy. Her mother died in 1892. One by one, the people who had anchored her to the world were gone. As her fame grew, so too did her desire for invisibility. Elisabeth became increasingly reclusive, often travelling under assumed names, avoiding portraits, public appearances, and even mirrors. Yet amid this withdrawal, something unexpected occurred. Her relationship with Emperor Franz Joseph slowly softened. Time and distance transformed their marriage into something gentler, no longer a romance, but a genuine friendship. They spent little time together in person, yet wrote to one another frequently. Paradoxically, separation seemed to bring them closer. In 1898, Elisabeth was travelling incognito through Geneva, seeking anonymity as she so often did in her later years. When news of her presence leaked, fate moved swiftly. On September 10th, Elisabeth and her lady-in-waiting were walking toward a steamer on Lake Geneva when she was suddenly attacked. Her assailant was Luigi Lucchini, an Italian anarchist driven not by personal hatred but by ideology. His goal was chillingly indiscriminate: to kill a monarch, any monarch, armed with a thin, sharpened blade. He struck Elisabeth once in the chest before fleeing. At first, the wound appeared insignificant. Elisabeth boarded the steamer as planned, insisting she was unharmed. Only moments later did she collapse. It was then discovered that the blade had pierced her heart. She died almost immediately. Elisabeth's body was returned to Vienna for a state funeral and laid to rest in the Capuchin church. Alongside generations of Habsburg rulers, Lucheni was apprehended, tried and convicted. In 1910, while still in prison, he took his own life. The violence that ended Elisabeth's life was not only senseless, it was tragically ironic. Known for her compassion and deep empathy, she had long favoured ordinary people over aristocrats and remained profoundly attuned to ideals of freedom, equality and human dignity. Far from embodying royal detachment, Elisabeth had spent much of her life resisting the very system she was born into.